Hello class, welcome to Pre-Algebra Lesson 6.4, which is all about factoring linear expressions. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to use the greatest common factor, or the GCF is what we shorten that to factor linear expressions. So the greatest common factor is the greatest, right? So the biggest number that can multiply into another number. Okay, so greatest common factor is the biggest number that can multiply into another number. Now, if we're talking about finding the greatest common factor of 12y and 30y, first of all, that's talking about like, what do these two things have in common? So we're going to talk about actually the variable first, because I think it's one of the easier things to identify right now. We have a y here and a y here, so we know they have a y in common. So I'm just going to write a little note to myself that they have y in common. And I'm going to go like that. Now I want to figure out, what do the numbers 12 and 30 have in common? So the way that we do that is we have to know what numbers multiply to 12 and what numbers multiply to 30. Now sometimes I see students just do like a guess and check, and then eventually they find something that works. I like to go in a slightly more organized fashion. So I start with 1. So I say 1 and 12. And then I know 2. 2 goes into 12 6 times. Then I see, does 3 go into the number? Yeah, 3 goes in there 4 times. And once you hit two numbers that are back to back, you know you're done. There's no other numbers that multiply into your top number. Now let's try that with the number 30. We have 1 and 30. 2 goes into 30 15 times. 3 times 10 goes into 30. 4 doesn't multiply to 30, but 5 does. 5 times 6. And I see I have two back-to-back numbers, so I know I am done listing my factors. There aren't any other numbers that multiply to 30. Now, looking at these lists, I want to see what is the biggest number they have in common. So I see a 12 here, but no 12 here. I see a 6 here and a 6 here. So that would be my greatest common factor between 12 and 30. So my answer for this problem would be 6 and then also a y. So you write it as 6y. And that's my GCF. Okay, why don't you go ahead and find the GCF of 24a and 32a. Good luck. All right, for this problem, hopefully you made your little tree. You saw that the biggest number that multiplies into both 24 and 32 is the number 8. And then you saw that both of the terms have an a with them. So your greatest common factor would be 8a. If you have questions about that, please be sure to ask some questions. I'm happy to help you. Now let's move on to another way to find the greatest common factor of monomials. We're going to use something called prime factorization. So this is kind of a two-step process where when we get to the test, you're going to get a point for writing out the prime factorization and a point for having the right answer. And I should have said that on the last example too. You're going to get a point for writing this information over here, and you're going to get a point for the correct answer. Okay, so make sure you're practicing writing this out right now. All right, now let's jump back to, I mentioned prime factorization. So what that means is we're just going to write it out a little differently. So I have 18a. So if I want to break that down, I think, okay, what numbers multiply to 18? You can choose any of the numbers that multiply to 18. I usually like to use the number 2. So I'm going to say 2 times 9 times a. And then I think about those numbers. Is there anything that 2 breaks down into other than itself and 1? No, because it's a prime number. So we leave the 2, and then I think, okay, what multiplies to 9? That would be 3 times 3. And then I still have that times a. So this right here can't break down any further. So this is what's known as the prime factorization. Okay, let's try that again for the 20ab. Say, okay, what multiplies to 20? It's an even number. I'm going to start with 2. So 2 times 10 times a times b which then becomes 2 times, instead of 10, I'm going to say 2 times 5 times A times B. And you'll notice that I'm writing my numbers least to greatest, or smallest to biggest. I want you to do that same thing. It just kind of helps keep track of everything and makes this next step a little bit easier. So the next step is to find the GCF. So what you do is I take these two lists and I circle the things they have in common. So there's a 2, there's a 2. And once you've circled it, you can't circle it again, okay? So then 3, there's no 3 in this bottom one, so I can't circle that. And there's not another 2 up top or a 5 up top. So I'm done with the regular numbers, but both of them have an A. So that means if I look at what's circled, 2A, that's my greatest common factor. Okay, so that is the method called prime factorization. So now I want you to use that same method, prime factorization, to find the GCF of 42xy and 14y. Good luck. All right, for your answer, hopefully you saw that they had a 2, a 7, and a y in common. So if you multiply all of those together, 2 times 7 is 14. So we have 14y as our answer. If you have questions about that, please be sure to ask for some help. I'm happy to help you. And let's look at our next example. Now we're going to do something called factoring. And factoring is where you look for that GCF and you pull it out and you see what's remaining. So it's basically going to look like the distributive property, but backwards, okay? So instead of getting rid of parentheses by multiplying, we are actually putting parentheses in and dividing. Okay, so what I mean by that is if I look at this 2x and 2, okay, the GCF there, they both have a 2 in common. So I'm going to write 2, I'm going to write some parentheses, and then I say what's 2x divided by 2? That would just be an x left there. And then what's 2 divided by 2? 1. So my answer would look like this, 2 parentheses x plus 1. Oftentimes, I'll see students forget to put the 1. They would just write down the answer 2 parentheses x and call it a day. But it's really important you remember that 1. Let's try it with another problem. We have negative 3x minus 3. So what do both of those things have? I see they both have a negative and they both have a 3. So I'm going to write negative 3 on the outside. It is possible for a GCF to be negative. Okay, so I'm pulling out that negative. And then I have negative 3x divided by negative 3 leaves me with just a regular x. And then negative 3 divided by negative 3, negative divided by negative is positive, and 3 divided by 3 is 1. So my answer will look like this, negative 3 parentheses x plus 1. And let's move on to the last problem on this page. Now I have a 12 and a 9. So the numbers aren't the same, but let's just quickly take a look. What's our GCF? So for 12, I have a GCF of 3. So I'm going to put a 3 on the outside, and I'm going to say what's 12 divided by 3? It's 4. I still have an x. And then what's 9 divided by 3? It is 3. So this is what my final answer would look like. Okay. If you have questions about that, please raise your hand, ask for help. I'm happy to help you. That's what I signed up for when I decided to be a teacher. Okay. But if you feel ready, I want you to try this next problem on your own. Good luck. Hopefully you got a greatest common factor of 2, and then you said 6 divided by 2 is 3, and we have an x with that term, and then 14 divided by 2 is 7. So your answer is 2 parentheses 3x plus 7 parentheses. If you have questions about that, ask for some help, and let's move on to our last example from this lesson. All right, so now we have 12x plus 7y. So again, I'm going to look, what's my GCF? So I have 1 and 12, 2 and 6, or 3 and 4. Those are my factors of 12. Then 1 and then 7 is just 1 and 7. So the greatest common factor I have is a 1. So if I were to rewrite that with parentheses, I'd have 1 parentheses 12x plus 7y parentheses. And when we multiply by 1, that doesn't change anything. So whenever your GCF is 1, this is a special instance, and this is when you say that there is no common factor. Okay, so if your GCF equals 1, there is no common factor. All right, last problem for you to do today. I want you to factor 12x plus 11, and if you cannot, write no common factor. Good luck. All right, for this problem, hopefully you realize that there was no common factor because the greatest common factor equaled 1. If you have questions about this problem or anything else from the video, please be sure to reach out for some help. I'm happy to help you. Have a great day.